Medieval jousting was supposed to be entertainment, a display of skill, courage, and chivalry before cheering crowds. But the physics of two armored men charging at each other with wooden lances at 30 miles per hour created conditions for catastrophic injury. Splinters penetrated skulls, horses crushed fallen riders, lances punched through visors into brains. What follows are 9 tournament deaths that reveal how the most celebrated sport of the Middle Ages regularly became a slaughterhouse. The King Who Died from a Splinter, June 30th, 1559. Paris, France. The royal tournament grounds at Rue Saint-Antoine were filled with spectators celebrating dual weddings, the king's daughter and his sister. Henry II of France, 40 years old and considered one of the most skilled jousters in his realm, prepared for what would be his final ride. The king wore ornate armor, a black and white plumed helmet with a golden visor. Beautiful, but offering less protection than standard tournament gear. His opponent was Gabriel de Montgomery, captain of the Scottish Guard. Montgomery had tried to withdraw from the match. The king insisted they continue. The two men charged toward each other. On their third pass, their lances collided with tremendous force. Montgomery's lance shattered upon impact. A large wooden splinter, nearly 6 inches long, penetrated the king's helmet visor. The crowd fell silent. Henry remained upright in his saddle for several seconds before his body went limp. Attendants rushed to his side. When they removed his helmet, they discovered the horrific truth. The splinter had entered through his right eye, driving fragments of wood and metal deep into his brain. Blood poured from the wound as the king moaned in agony. Henry remained conscious. He could feel the wood embedded in his skull, pressing against his brain tissue. The royal physicians, including the famous surgeon Ambroise Paré, worked desperately to extract the fragments. Each attempt to remove the splinters caused excruciating pain. The wound quickly became infected, despite their efforts. For 10 days, Henry drifted between consciousness and delirium. The infection spread deeper into his brain. The king experienced seizures, periods of paralysis, and moments of clarity where he understood his fate. The pain was constant and unbearable. By July 9th, his brain had swollen significantly, putting pressure against his skull. On July 10th, after nearly 2 weeks of suffering, Henry II of France died from the infection that had consumed his brain. His last hours were spent in agony, unable to speak or move, trapped in a body that was shutting down around him. If you value this kind of detailed historical reconstruction that examines the brutal realities behind medieval pageantry, please consider liking this video. Impalement through the Skull Spring 1438, Paris. A grand tournament drew knights from across Europe. Among them was Piers de Massy, a respected French nobleman known for his aggressive style on the lists. That day, he faced English knight John Astley in what was called a joust of war. Unlike more common tournaments where lances had coronals, blunted, crown-shaped tips, this match used sharp-pointed lances. The weapons were solid oak, 9 feet long with metal tips designed to pierce armor. Both men knew the risks. At the signal, both knights spurred their horses forward. Their mounts reached full gallop, thundering toward each other at nearly 30 miles per hour. Astley aimed his lance perfectly, keeping it steady as the distance closed. When they met at center field, his weapon struck with devastating precision. The lance hit Massey directly in the face. The metal tip punched through his helmet's visor, shattering the steel plate. Witnesses described a sickening crack that echoed across the field. The lance drove straight through Massey's skull, entering just below his left eye and emerging from the back of his head. The force of the impact lifted Massey from his saddle. For several seconds, his body remained impaled on Astley's lance, suspended in midair. Blood poured from both sides of the wound, coating the wooden shaft. When Astley lowered his weapon, Massey slid off and collapsed to the ground, still moving. Incredibly, Massey was still conscious. His body convulsed as he tried to breathe through the blood filling his throat. His hands clutched at his ruined face, fingers touching splintered bone and exposed brain tissue. The crowd watched in horror as he struggled for nearly a minute, making terrible gurgling sounds. Death finally came when blood loss and brain damage became too severe. His final movements were nothing more than random muscle spasms. Dragged to death by a Spanish stallion, June 27, 1241. Ware Priory, Hertfordshire, England. A forbidden tournament was held despite King Henry III's explicit ban. Gilbert Marshall, 4th Earl of Pembroke, was among the participants. At 44 years old, Marshall was an experienced nobleman but lacked the extensive tournament training of his more famous father, William Marshall. He arrived riding a magnificent Spanish stallion, a powerful but notoriously difficult animal to control. The horse stood nearly 17 hands high with powerful haunches that made it faster than most tournament mounts. Those close to the field noticed the animal was already agitated, pawing at the ground and fighting against its bit. Gilbert struggled to keep the stallion under control as they prepared to enter the lists. As he urged his mount forward, the horse reared unexpectedly. Gilbert, caught off guard, was thrown from the saddle. His right foot remained caught in the stirrup, a heavy iron construction designed to keep knights stable during jousting impacts. The frightened stallion bolted, dragging Gilbert across the tournament field. His head and shoulders bounced violently against the hard-packed earth. Witnesses described the sickening sound of his helmet repeatedly striking the ground. With each impact, blood sprayed from the openings in his visor. For nearly 100 yards, Gilbert was pulled helplessly behind the panicking animal. His arms flailed as he desperately tried to free himself. His armor, designed to protect against frontal impacts, now became a prison of metal scraping against the ground, tearing away at his flesh beneath. Other knights attempted to intercept the horse, but failed to catch the swift Spanish stallion. When the animal was finally stopped, Gilbert was still conscious. His face was unrecognizable, a mass of torn flesh and exposed bone. Blood bubbled from his mouth as he tried to speak. He remained alive for several more hours, his body broken beyond repair. Internal bleeding filled his lungs until he could no longer draw breath. As evening fell, Gilbert Marshall died from his injuries. The groin impalement of the young Earl, December 1389. Woodstock Palace, England. The royal court gathered for Christmas celebrations that included a grand tournament. Among the competitors was John Hastings, 3rd Earl of Pembroke, just 16 years old and recently married. Despite his youth, Hastings was eager to prove himself in the lists. He wore elaborate armor adorned with his family crest, but like many young knights, he had chosen lighter protection for greater mobility. The Christmas joust was meant to be spectacle, rather than true contest. The lances used were designed to break easily upon impact, creating a dramatic shower of splinters while minimizing injury. Hastings faced Sir John St. John, an experienced knight who had served in France. Their first two passes were uneventful. On the third pass, both riders charged at full tilt. When they met at the center of the field, St. John's lance struck Hastings's shield and shattered as intended. But the physics of the impact sent a large splinter downward at a sharp angle. The wooden shard found the gap between the young earl's cuisses, the armor protecting his thighs, and his fald, which covered his lower abdomen. The jagged wood tore through Hastings's silk undergarments and plunged deep into his groin. The splinter severed his femoral artery, one of the body's largest blood vessels. Blood immediately began pumping from the wound with each heartbeat. Hastings dropped his lance and clutched at the injury, his gauntleted hands unable to stop the flow. Attendants rushed to the young earl as he slumped in his saddle. When they lowered him to the ground, they found the wooden splinter embedded nearly 6 inches into his groin. Attempts to remove it only widened the wound. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the frozen December earth. These deaths raise questions about why medieval society continued tournaments despite their obvious dangers. What do you think motivated knights to risk their lives for sport? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hastings remained conscious for several minutes, his face growing increasingly pale. He could feel his life draining away with each pulse of blood. Physicians were summoned, but arrived too late. The young earl's eyes widened in shock as he realized his fate. He attempted to speak, but could only manage a gurgling sound as blood loss sent him into shock. Within 15 minutes of the impact, John Hastings was dead, his young body emptied of blood. Death by chaos at the melee, August 7, 1218. Neuss, Germany. A massive tournament drew nobility from across the Holy Roman Empire. Unlike the more structured joust, this event was a melee, a chaotic mock battle where dozens of knights fought simultaneously in a confined space. Adolf, Count of Berg, a powerful 48-year-old nobleman, joined the fray wearing heavy chainmail reinforced with metal plates. The melee began at midday under the summer sun. Over 60 armored men on horseback charged into the designated field. Armed with blunted weapons that could still deliver crushing force. There were few rules and no barriers separating combatants. Count Adolf had successfully dismounted several knights when the crowd's cheers turned to gasps. In the chaos of crossing horses and clashing weapons, 2 knights collided directly in front of him. One was thrown from his saddle and crashed into the count's horse. Adolf's mount reared unexpectedly, throwing the count backward. As he fell, Adolf's helmet struck the pommel of another rider's saddle. The impact crushed the back of his helmet inward, driving the metal directly into his skull. The thin bone at the base of his skull shattered. Fragments of bone were forced into his brainstem, immediately paralyzing him from the neck down. Adolf fell to the ground, unable to move as horses continued to thunder around him. Unable to raise his arms to surrender or call for help, he lay helpless in the dirt. Before his squire could reach him, 2 more horses trampled over his chest and legs, crushing his ribs. When finally pulled from the field, Adolf was still conscious. His eyes moved frantically, but he could not speak or move. Blood trickled from his ears and nose, clear signs of severe head trauma. Physicians determined his neck was broken. Nothing could be done. For 6 agonizing hours, Adolf remained aware as his breathing grew increasingly labored. Each breath became more difficult as his diaphragm gradually ceased functioning. He died that evening, his lungs finally unable to draw air, his mind aware until the very end. The fatal fall of the young count, March 3, 1326, near Wassenberg, Germany. A prestigious tournament brought together the nobility of the Rhine region. Among them was Count Reginald II of Guelders, a 29-year-old ruler known for his aggressive fighting style and expensive armor. His helm was particularly notable, a great bassinet with a narrow vision slit, offering excellent protection but severely limiting his field of view. The tournament featured jousting with solid lances, heavier than the hollow tournament lances used in more ceremonial events. Each weapon weighed nearly 15 pounds, capable of delivering tremendous force. Count Reginald had already won 2 matches when he prepared to face Baron Wilhelm von Jülich, a rival lord from a neighboring territory. As the 2 knights charged toward each other, Reginald's mount stumbled slightly, throwing off his aim. Wilhelm's lance struck the Count's shield at an awkward angle, glancing upward toward his helmet. The lance tip found the narrow eye slot of Reginald's bassinet and penetrated with devastating force. The impact tore the helmet backward, twisting Reginald's neck violently. Those near the lists heard the sharp crack of vertebrae snapping. The lance tip continued into the Count's left eye socket, destroying the eye and penetrating nearly 3 inches into his brain. The force was so great that Reginald was lifted completely out of his saddle and thrown backward off his horse. He landed on his back, his body convulsing as the brain damage triggered immediate seizures. Blood poured from the eyes of his helmet, which had been pushed into his skull rather than being dislodged. When attendants removed the crushed helmet, they found half of his face caved inward, a mass of shattered bone and brain tissue. Despite the catastrophic injury, Reginald remained alive for nearly 20 minutes. He could not speak, but his right eye moved, following the movements of those around him. His breathing came in irregular gasps as his brain stem struggled to maintain basic functions. Blood bubbled from his nose and mouth with each labored breath. As the seizures intensified, blood loss and brain damage finally overcame him. Count Reginald died on the tournament field, surrounded by horrified spectators who had come to witness sport, but instead saw destruction. The Lord killed for an enemy's horse, May 19, 1300. Salisbury, England. A tournament drew knights from across Britain. William Douglas, a minor Scottish noble from the powerful Douglas clan, rode into the lists that day unaware of the grudge held against him. He sat atop a magnificent black destrier, a war horse standing 17 hands high and weighing over 2,400 pounds. His armor was simple compared to the English knights, but his horsemanship was exceptional. Among the spectators was Sir Robert de Rose, an English baron whose lands had been raided by Douglas's men the previous year. The raid had cost de Rose several valuable horses and the life of his cousin. Tournament rules strictly forbade the settling of real grievances in the lists, but de Rose had planned his revenge carefully. Douglas rode against 3 English knights successfully. Before his 4th match, de Rose approached the weapon master and quietly exchanged a blunted lance for a sharpened one. As Douglas prepared for his next joust, de Rose rode into the lists unexpectedly. Officials shouted for him to withdraw, but he charged directly toward Douglas. Instead of aiming for the Scottish lord, de Rose drove his sharpened lance directly into the chest of Douglas's horse. The weapon penetrated the animal's heart, killing it instantly. The massive destrier collapsed forward, its legs buckling beneath its weight. Douglas, caught completely unprepared, was thrown violently over the horse's head. His momentum carried him forward, while his feet remained briefly caught in the stirrups. His body rotated in midair, causing him to land headfirst on the packed earth. The weight of his armor drove his helmeted head downward with crushing force. Witnesses heard the sickening crack of his neck breaking on impact. But the collapse of his horse was not yet complete. As Douglas lay paralyzed on the ground, the mass of the destrier's body continued its forward momentum and rolled directly over him. The weight of the dying animal, over half a ton, crushed Douglas's chest beneath it. Douglas remained conscious through the initial impact. He could feel his ribs splintering as the horse's weight compressed his chest. His lungs collapsed, making each breath a desperate, futile gasp. Blood filled his mouth as internal hemorrhaging accelerated. His eyes remained open, fixed in a horrified stare as he suffocated, unable to move or cry out. Within minutes, William Douglas was dead, his body broken beyond recognition beneath his fallen mount. The blood sport of chivalry. Medieval tournaments were supposed to embody the ideals of chivalry: honor, courage, martial skill. They were pageantry, entertainment, a way for knights to display prowess without the chaos of actual warfare. But the reality was far more brutal. The deaths documented here span 3 centuries and multiple European kingdoms, yet they share common characteristics: catastrophic head trauma, impalement, crushing injuries, and bleeding that medieval medicine had no ability to stop. Why did medieval society continue tournaments despite their obvious dangers? Economic factors played a role. Successful tournament knights could win prizes, capture opponents' horses and armor, and attract wealthy patrons. For landless younger sons of nobility, tournaments offered one of the few paths to fortune and fame. Cultural imperatives mattered even more. A knight who refused to joust risked being labeled a coward. Martial prowess was the defining characteristic of aristocratic masculinity. Kings like Henry II felt compelled to participate precisely because kingship was expected to include warrior leadership. Medical ignorance compounded the danger. Medieval physicians had no concept of traumatic brain injury, no understanding of internal bleeding, no antibiotics for infections. A splinter to the eye that penetrated the brain would almost certainly prove fatal within days, as Henry II's death demonstrated. The tournament deaths also reveal the gap between chivalric ideal and reality. De Ros murdered Douglas by killing his horse, a deliberate violation of tournament rules motivated by revenge. Multiple deaths occurred when victims were still conscious but helpless, suffering for minutes or hours before dying. Modern medical analysis would classify many of these injuries as preventable with better helmet design, blunted lances, and basic safety protocols. But medieval tournaments prioritized spectacle and authenticity over safety. These deaths weren't accidents in the modern sense. They were predictable outcomes of the sport's design. Yet tournaments continued for centuries, claiming hundreds of lives, because medieval culture valued martial display more than it valued preventing aristocratic deaths. The blood of nobles soaked into tournament grounds across Europe for 300 years before the practice finally declined in the 16th century. Not because society became more humane, but because gunpowder made heavy cavalry obsolete and tournaments became mere anachronistic pageantry. If this examination of medieval tournament deaths and the culture that enabled them intrigued you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more historical documentaries that reveal the brutal realities behind romanticized history. Thank you for watching.